Alrighty. Thank you for that. So, although I do come to you this morning from the White House, what I'm about to say is not an official opinion or position of the Obama administration. My thoughts and opinions on the topic that I'm going to be talking with you about today are long held by me, though I'm sure you'll be able to put together why I am working with the digital service now. The world is in a bit of a state. In fact, it's pretty messed up right now. I surrendered my civil rights to get on a plane to come here. I think this is really disturbing. This kind of security theater is really just a symptom compared with the real problems of dealing with world terrorism in organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But we also have to worry about issues of online security now in ways that we've never actually thought about before. We are still, in spite of the fact that the US has mostly pulled out, fighting two major wars. The world is still recovering from a major economic meltdown that happened in 2000 and 2008. Greece is the lingering evidence of that. Let's not forget the lack of action on climate change, unrest in Africa and the Middle East. There's actually less trust in government than there ever has been. We need more regulation on privacy and security because we don't trust the companies and the organizations that we do business with. And strangely, wackily, there have been protests in affluent places like Hong Kong, which give us things like the umbrella revolution. The list could go on for a while, but basically, I had to stop watching the news. I feel like there's this dark wave, kind of a dark age that we've been living through. And it started with a butterfly. Not the butterfly of chaos theory, you know, the one that flaps its wings on a tree in South America and changes things in the world. Not quite. I'm talking about this butterfly. This is a form. This is probably the most important form in the US government and represents probably the most important form across governments. This is how many, many, many citizens interact with their government in a conscious, intentional way. And this particular form changed everything. This is a ballot from the 2000 US presidential election. And it is the culmination of a bunch of design decisions and constraints. It is a designed artifact. How this works is, that's a punch card. It has a bunch of numbers printed on it, and around each of the numbers is a perforated box. That's called a CHAD. You slide the card behind the booklet that is the actual ballot, and you can see in the middle of the double-page spread are holes. Those positions of the holes change as you flip pages in the ballot. And so when you get to the candidate that you want to select, you push a pin through that hole, and it's supposed to push a CHAD out of the punch card. The punch cards get collected in the ballot box, and they get processed to tally the vote. This is a 1960s technology. It worked awesome for many decades until this thing happened in 2000 when a very well-intentioned public servant made some important design decisions. Her main decision was that she wanted to make the type bigger in the ballot book. Ideally, the ballot looks like this, with all of the candidates lined up on the left-hand page, and the right-hand page is intentionally left blank. But increasing the type size actually split the candidates over onto the double-page spread, interlacing. So, if you want to vote for Al Gore and Joe Lieberman, which hole do you punch? Thousands of people thought it was the second one. Thousands of them. It's actually the third hole. If you did punch the second hole, you actually voted for a guy named Pat Buchanan, who is a religious fundamentalist and probably not the guy that thousands of Jewish grannies in Miami-Dade County, Florida, meant to vote for. Funny now, but what was the outcome? The outcome was, after several recounts, the United States Supreme Court stopped the counting of ballots in Florida and declared George W. Bush the 43rd President of the United States. Nothing like this had ever happened in US history. And this is the result of a series of cascading mistakes, of really simple, mundane design decisions. I believe that design affects world peace. Things like this keep happening. And even though every state in every county in the United States has new voting systems since 2000, we still see design failures. The ballot that's on your seat is a result of those changes. Now tell me this is actually an improvement. It's not just in the US, and it's not just elections. Even though this is a bit of a disaster, this form, things have improved a lot, and I actually have hope. I have hope for the world because there are a lot of fabulous things happening. Now, most of them are responses to crises, but there are tons of awesome things happening through design. And so I believe that we are on the cusp of an enlightenment, and that we're going to be moving to world peace through design. And I want to show you some examples, and some of them are going to seem really kind of mundane, but they affect millions of people. One of my favorite ones, this is from a Senate contest in Minnesota in 2008 that Al Franken eventually won. The margin of victory was so tight in this election that there were several recounts in this case. And when the Secretary of State, this is the person who actually owns elections in states in the US, looked at where the most ballots were coming from that were challenged in the recounts, they were all mail-in ballots. So we have this opportunity that if you can't go to the polls to vote, you can apply for an absentee ballot and vote from home and mail it in. So most of the problem votes were from mail-in ballots. So we called up my little group of people and said, what do we do about this? Can you help us redesign this thing? And we said, we won't redesign it for you. We'd like to do some usability testing with you. So he sent his staff out to a library in St. Paul, and on a Saturday, and with a bunch of volunteers, we went from this to this after 2 rounds. You can see, even from the squint test, that this is better, right? It's easier to skim and scan. It looks like there are fewer instructions, and if you have low literacy, which something like 48% of all American adults fit into that category, you can follow the images and mark and cast your ballot. When the mortgage crisis hit in the United States in 2008, now, by the way, this is a thing that didn't really affect Canada because you have laws against giving loans to people who can't pay them back. For now. Well, if you re-elect Harper, that may change. As a result of the mortgage meltdown, the federal U.S. government formed the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. And the very first thing they did was a design project. They rewrote and redesigned the disclosures for lenders and borrowers about what their responsibilities were. In 2013, Obamacare went live with a website called healthcare.gov. Live, though, is a bit of an understatement because when 2.8 million people came to the site the first day, by the way, has anybody else had that happen? When 2.8 million people came to the site the first day, of course, the servers crashed. And a bunch of volunteers showed up to rescue the site, and over the next few weeks, propped it up well enough that by the end of the enrollment period, a few months later, 10 million people had signed up for health insurance. Most of them had never had health insurance before. This is a huge thing. But it turns out that there are lots of projects in the US government that are like healthcare.gov, massively expensive IT projects that affect a ton of people. And so when the president started seeing this, formed a group that's now called the United States Digital Service about a year ago, last August. And we now are basically a team of super skilled generalist problem solver IT firefighters who work with federal agencies to work on these very high-risk projects. All of this happened because of design problems. Now, in the meantime, you Canadians can be quite proud of yourselves because this is Canada.ca. It's lovely. The common look and feel of Canada's government websites is a super thing, but it was also launched by a lawsuit, mostly around accessibility. It is a good thing. More accessible design and following the web content accessibility guidelines is going to be great for everybody. This kind of change takes time, though. The common look and feel started to form in about 2010, 2011, and it is not evenly distributed through the Canadian government. I should say, though, that this not only is a massively huge hero image, this is the size of my laptop screen, by the way, it's a carousel, so maybe not all of the accessibility guidelines are being followed. And by the way, you should only have enormous hero images if you have enormous heroes. It does make me wonder, though, why, once you're at the Prime Minister's site, you can't actually get back to Canada.ca. And I was really hopeful about the fun link up there. Like, maybe it showed the PM having fun. Or it showed a list of what he does for fun, but it doesn't do any of that. It's actually a site for kids, which needs some help. But generally, Canadian government websites have come a long way since 2011, and I commend every single person who had anything to do with that happening because it's beautiful and it's usable and you all deserve a raise. There are many other good things happening through design, not just on websites. I love this. This is called a lifesaver, actually, and it's developed by Michael Pritchard's company to make it easy and cheap to have clean drinking water in places where it is not readily available, like Africa and Asia. This, though it's gigantic on this screen, is actually the size of a postage stamp. It's made of paper, it costs pennies, and it's a medical diagnostic tool that's easily biodegradable. And this, I just love this project. This is from my friend Andrea Ippolito, who's running this thing through the Department of Veterans Affairs in the US to develop an open ecosystem of designs of prosthetics and assistive technologies that ideally can be 3D printed individually for personal fit at a super low cost. I'm excited about this. They just ran a big challenge. It just closed at the end of July, and I can't wait to see what came out of it. So when the business of government includes design as a priority, the costs of development and support are much, much lower. We know this already. One of the systems that was broken in healthcare.gov, the authentication system, cost hundreds of millions of dollars over several years to develop and tens of millions of dollars a month to maintain. That was replaced by 6 guys in t-shirts in less than a year for the cost of about $40 million and costs about $4 million to maintain. Big difference design makes there. But business also benefits from good design in all kinds of civic life because this keeps regulation down and it keeps costs down for suppliers. The negative unintended outcomes are much less likely when design is involved and when there are decisions that are being made that are based on data. I hear that usability is very popular here. So, you are the people to do this. You do it every day if you work in design because you have the superpowers to save the world. You make decisions, and every decision that you make matters in somebody's life. You're driven by purpose and a culture of generosity. You know the process, and you know the users, and you know how to find out who they are and what they're doing and where they are, what's happening in their heads. And you know how important it is to design to standards because you are trained in best practices. You work with design every day, so you see the impact that design has on users. I hope, I believe that you understand the value of research and the attention to detail, and you're willing to wait for good things to happen. But none of those actually matter because you can be the agent of change because you know that change happens slowly over time. And you can make that happen through the tiny decisions that you make every day. Now, it may be frustrating because things take a long time, especially in government, but there are often very good reasons. And ultimately, citizens, users, customers, human beings will be better off because design is present. And so I urge you not to waste or hide your superpowers. I want you to go take action. I want you to get involved, and when you leave this super awesome bubble of this fantastic conference and this beautiful day, go out and share your knowledge. And I have a couple of ideas about how to do that. Not surprisingly, I'm going to suggest that you sign up to be a poll worker, be an election worker. This is often a very long day. It can be about 16 hours. It's sometimes really boring, especially if it's a local election and hardly anybody shows up. The pay is bad, but this is not that much different from the jobs that you go to every day, probably. It does take a little bit of training, but the day can be incredibly rewarding. You learn so much how civic life happens, about what people care about, why they show up. You learn about how government works this way. It is crucially important to how elections are run because it takes a lot of people to do this. On average, it's about 190,000 to 200,000 people need to do this work for every major election in Canada. In the US, upwards of 3 million people work the polls for presidential election. So the need is great. Oh, and by the way, the average age of election workers in the US is about 70. I'm going to guess it's the same in the US. And so you all taking part would bring that average down substantially. Another really important thing you can do, which sounds really mundane, but that attention to detail thing is important here, and that is show up at your local riding or your county and say, I would like to help you proofread. All kinds of things need to be proofread, including the ballots for name spellings, to make sure that the right districts and the right offices are on the right ballots, but it goes further than elections. There are plenty of other ways that government interacts with citizens that desperately need some attention to detail, which is very difficult to find mistakes in when it's your stuff. So there are processes for this and tools, and you could really help your department prevent errors that are difficult to find. Finally, probably because I've signed up to do this, I urge you to step up. Don't just think about it. Commit to working with government for a year or two. And I don't mean like on a contract, I mean like going all in. It's an amazing experience that you just can't get from outside doing that, even as a direct contractor. And the involvement that you will have will make a difference to millions and millions of people. Also, at the Center for Civic Design, where I worked before I went to the digital service, we are constantly working on improving things like elections. I've also worked with Elections Canada, but also on other projects like clarifying credit card disclosures and translating forms and contracts. So you will learn about how government works and start the trickle up. So I believe in world peace through design, and I believe that we all are the people to make this happen. It is within your superpowers to prevent this from happening again. Thank you.
Okay, Steve, if I do the first question?
Yes.
I'm going to do the first question. Dana, lovely Dana.
Mark.
I noticed, we all noticed, you and it was a great talk, but you kind of skirted the White House and some of the work you do, and I get that, I understand. But we all want to know, like, what's Obama like? Right? Like, is he as cool as he seems? Like, I think the serious question is, what kind of interaction do you have with the senior leadership? Do you actually get Obama in the room? Do you actually get to deal with the president? Can you talk to that a little bit for us?
I can
think that'd be interesting.
Yes. I have met the president. I was with a bunch of people before the digital service was actually announced publicly, and we were in a room in the White House where he held forth for about a half an hour. Like, he came in the room, somebody else gave him talking points. He chucked the talking points and just talked from the heart for about 30 minutes about how important it was to fix this set of problems for his legacy, but for the American people. And he is very IT savvy. He is not making it up. And finished his conversation with us by asking us all, he said, in case you haven't figured it out already, you're here because I want you to come work for me. And so it's really hard to say no to such a compelling recruiter. But I don't have interaction with the president day to day. I have a couple of layers between him and me, but things happen every now and then on projects that we're working on that bring us into the White House to talk to the chief of staff or a deputy chief of staff. Those fancy people in the White House, they do actually make the decisions about where the digital service is deployed. And so when changes happen, we go to them and say, what do you want us to do next? So there's some interaction with the senior leadership.
Your side.
Okay. Anyone have a question for Dana they want to ask from your group? Okay, up at the back there. I'm going all the way. Here you go.
Great, thanks. Hello.
Hi.
My name's Kevin. I have the good fortune of working in the city government, so a lot of the stuff you
Thank you
talked
for
about-
doing that.
No, My pleasure. Yeah, no.
Kevin
no,
is actually
really.
the Deputy Chief of Staff for the City of Vancouver.
Thank you, Mark.
Just saying.
Just saying. My question to you is just around the structure of the digital service. Could you talk about, like, how do you prioritize? Because the government is so sprawling, there are so many different departments, and there's going to be problems that are outward facing you can recognize, but there's presumably thousands of things that people just aren't even aware of. So where do you begin in terms of identifying your workload and priorities?
Yeah, our formula basically is about how expensive is the project and how many people does it touch. And that is what drives our priorities. And honestly, whatever the policy priorities of the White House are. Those are the big things. And that is for the headquarters team. So it doesn't take long at the kind of scale that we're talking about to look at both of those main numbers. How much does it cost? How many people does it touch? And you start to see some trends in the kinds of projects that float to the surface. So our big priorities right now continue to be healthcare.gov because there are still things that are imperfect about how that is working on the back end. It's a hugely complex thing. So a federal government marketplace that involves at least two and possibly more federal agencies talking to one another. This is a very unusual thing for them to do. And then setting up and talking with the state exchanges. There are 20 some of those, 27 or 28, I think, with no common data format. Right, no standards about that, as well as all of the insurance companies that are taking part in the exchanges. So this is an enormous task that continues to get attention. I spend most of my time working with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. The president had wanted to take executive action on immigration reform last fall and announced that in November. That has since been blocked by a restraining order. First time my work's ever been stopped by a court order.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But there's a ton of work still to do at Citizenship and Immigration Service. For example, 99% of all of the student visas, work visas, lawful permanent resident statuses, and naturalization for citizenship activities happen on paper. And so we're, the team that I'm working with at Citizenship and Immigration Service are working with the fantastic staff, federal career people, as well as tons of contractors to bring CIS into the 21st century in terms of the system architecture that they're using and to build workflow and systems to support a future in which all of that stuff happens online electronically, including the decision making. So that's a big thing. Next is the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm pretty sure news about the disasters there has seeped north in any number of ways. There's a ton of work to do there to keep veterans alive and help them be healthy. We have 500,000 veterans returning from Afghanistan and Iraq, and we have a huge commitment to them. We're also working with the Social Security Administration and the Department of Education. So if somebody in the US is not covered by those things, then we're probably screwing up somehow.
I think we have some questions up here. You had one?
Thanks. You talked about accessibility from a design standpoint. It kind of triggered an interesting conversation up here. And the example that was given was the IQ test and how it's been shown that it fails because of not being culturally balanced or being swayed through a cultural lens. And I'm wondering, and I guess we were wondering in your work or from the design standpoint, what kind of approaches are you taking to ensure accessibility to the democratic processes through that broader cultural differences and the lenses that requires?
So in terms of elections specifically in the US, a lot of the voting systems generate ballots that look like the one that you have, but it won't be long and all of those voting systems will be dead because they were designed and engineered in the 1990s and they're built on that technology. So basically the hard drives are going to stop working and they're all going to be replaced. And so the future of elections looks much more like you being able to either do a practice ballot on a device that you own, or you can go to a central place where there are smaller devices like tablets where you can make your selections. You get a barcode, you take it to a polling place, and that you can use to scan and print out a printed ballot that then gets tallied. Now, in the US, it's important to have this printed artifact for the recounts, in case you didn't hear that theme, because it's really hard to do recounts on an electronic system. But the idea behind using personal devices and tablets in polling places too is to use the native accessibility features in those devices, which is getting better and better and better all the time, along with user interfaces for interacting with the ballot that have been tested with people with low literacy and mild cognitive disorders. And then following all of the accessibility guidelines that we know about. There's also an enormous voting system set of guidelines for usability and accessibility in the US that get tested against. So a lot of work is being done there. I'm proud to say that a team that I worked with created a thing called the Anywhere ballot that is a responsive, adaptive, accessible front end for ballots that would be served through anything that has a browser on it. We're not talking about internet voting here, but we are talking about using the tools that are embedded in the devices already. And for that project, which was a grant from the Election Assistance Commission through a group called ITIF, we did a ton of design and testing with people with low literacy. And I had to tell you, when I came away from those studies, I wanted to only test with people with low literacy after that, because I learned so much about what makes designs hard to use for people who are otherwise perfectly functioning in life and are managing just fine. Like, we do not make this stuff easy for people. So that's what's going on there. Thank you for that question.
Another question, maybe over here. Anyone have? Okay, right in the middle there. I'm going to hand the mic up to you.
Of the various projects you have for your team in the queue right now, or ones you'd like to put in the queue, is there one in particular that you would be excited about starting to work on with your team?
There's so many. There's so much to do. There's so much that can be done. My work with the digital service right now is shifting a little bit from specific work with Citizenship and Immigration Service, which has been hugely rewarding, by the way. Like, I walked in October last year, and I came from the future. It was 1998 there. I showed up from 2014. We've come to about 2005. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to let somebody else take over and bring us up the next 10 years or the next few months. But my job in the digital service over the next few months is going to be largely about creating a culture and removing the obstacles to helping people in government know who they are serving. Right now, there are weird historical artifacts and bits of lore around the government that prevent designers and developers from actually meeting their users and observing them using the designs that they're making. And so it's going to be my job to remove as many of those obstacles as I possibly can. So that's a big thing. Thank you. In addition to that, oh my God, there's still so much to do on U.S. elections that would make them more accessible to everyone. And this is a problem, I think, in Canadian elections. I think it's probably a problem across democratic societies where elections are being held. And that is that the information about who is running and what they stand for and what the other issues are that are on ballots is not easily available in a nonpartisan, objective format. And so my team, my co-director at the Center for Civic Design, Whitney Quisenberry, is doing a ton of work that I may miss on how to deliver information to people who are on the edges of civic engagement, where they may have voted in an election in the past, but they haven't for a very long time. And one of the things that we've learned about why that is that people they don't see the connection between some weird policy position that Donald Trump might have and how
Somebody's doing the raping.
and how it will change their lives directly. And when they don't see that relevant connection, they don't vote. And so Whitney and the center is doing a lot of work around that. So we've gone from pretty simple design challenges, like getting election officials in counties just to do better basic design, like using mixed case, to working on much more nuanced, much more complicated things like how to deliver information for people who are not deeply engaged. So
I'm going to go.
In a recent Reply All podcast, they talked about the SAM procurement procedure for government contractors. And it wasn't that the best people actually got the government contracts. It was the best people that could figure out the form, get the government contract.
Yeah.
So do you fix the system, or do you fix the system that's trying to fix the system?
I am ecstatically happy that you asked this question, because one of the features of the digital service in the White House is that we have superb people who work on procurement and government contracts. So a person in our team went and looked at all of the acquisition regulations to see if the rules needed to be changed and new guidance needed to be made about how government contracts are requested and procured and then managed, to see if the reason that government keeps doing crappy, expensive waterfall projects that turn out IT that doesn't actually work was because of the procurement rules. And it turns out that it isn't because of the procurement rules. It's mostly because of the fear of risk. And so Tracy Walker is the person who did that audit and found that the acquisition rules are really simple and straightforward, and you can let agile projects and manage agile projects in the existing rule set. And so she and a few other people in the digital service team now have developed workshops and boilerplate requests for proposals and all kinds of things that they help all of the federal agencies do better on procurement with. And when we've tested those things out a little bit, we're going to make those open source so that cities and states all over the world can download them and use them as templates.
Yes.
Stephen, you have one way up there. Then we'll do one
Okay.
more after that, and we'll wrap it up.
Run!
Come on, man.
Oh, wow, that's impressive. I was kidding. I couldn't do that.
Hi, Bruce Campbell. I'm a bit of a design/techie geek person, and it sounds like
Verified.
What you're verified. Thank you, Mark. It sounds like you're sort of wrapping around the surface of something that I've heard called government as a platform, which is the idea of making all departments in government eat their own dog food, not back-channel information sources, and present the same stuff to the public that they're using to exchange information between themselves. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Government as a platform is not really a thing that we have embraced yet, but it is a thing that the UK government digital service is definitely working on. I'm really excited about that. Also, we sort of look at them as the prototype for what we are doing, so let them go first and see how it goes. But the Obama administration has been one of the most open governments that the US has ever had. And so one of the principles in the playbook that we work from, and you can find this at cio.playbook.gov, the digital service playbook, is default to open. And that means being transparent about what we're doing, making stuff in the open, making it available after it's developed, and constantly taking feedback from the public. And so this is a huge thing. It is also really scary to some of the agencies. And so we are trying to work ways of doing this that doesn't freak them out completely, and will help them see the value of being open and transparent, not make them fear being open and transparent. And some of that really comes from helping them win, helping them ship. A lot of the big IT problems that we've had over the last 10 years have just been, because of crappy contracts and subpar IT that has been procured. And that ends up being embarrassing. Like, nobody wants to end up at the Senate hearing with somebody reading your emails out loud to you. And that's not the kind of openness that we're looking for. And so we have been kind of shameless in reminding them that that is the ultimate scenario and that they could be open now to a smaller, more positive audience and get a lot more feedback up front instead of ending up in the CNN news cycle for 6 weeks.
We're at 10 o'clock, so we're going to be a little bit late this morning. I want to ask, this area has been
Great question.
neglected.
Aw.
Let's have one terrific question to finish this off. Who's got one? Okay.
Hi, I just had a question about the session you ran where you were redesigning the absentee ballot, I think it was. You talked about the sessions you ran. I was just curious, who was represented in the room while you guys were doing that redesigning?
So how that worked, this is a thing that we think of as being flash usability testing. It's the research nerds equivalent to a design jam or a hackathon. And how this works is we put together the artifact that we wanted to do usability testing on. We approached the librarians at the St. Paul, Minnesota library and said, this is what we'd like to do, do you mind? And they all said, are you kidding? This is awesome. Please intercept our patrons and have them take part. We set these things up where we basically gave them a copy of the form and said, use it and vote the way you normally would. And then we observed them doing that. So it was a total convenience sample based on who came in and out of the library that day. And the people who were administering the study were people from the staff of the Secretary of State of Minnesota and a whole bunch of volunteers who came to us through organizations like the User Experience Professionals Association and AIGA and other groups like that, who showed up at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday and said they'd stay until it closed or we had enough data. And then most of them showed up again a couple weeks later to do the second iteration. Thank you. You're welcome.
That's it for you, my dear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.